if government naturally wants to buy stuff it can't afford, what's the best form of government? Anarchism, libertarianism. So not even there's not even armies. There's no borders. That's anarchism.
The least,
the smallest possible. The smallest possible.
The best government would be the least, and the debate will be over that.
When you think about this stuff, do you think about, okay, government is the way it is. I, as a person that can generate great ideas, how do I operate in this world? Or do you also think about the big picture? If we start a new civilization somewhere on Mars, do you think about what's the ultimate form of government? What's at least a promising thing to try?
You know, I have laser eyes on my profile on Twitter, Lex.
What does that mean?
And the significance of laser eyes is to focus on the thing that can make a difference.
Yes.
And if I look at the civilization, I would say half the problems in the civilization are due to the fact that our understanding of economics and money is defective. Half, 50%. I don't know, it's worth $500 trillion worth of problems. Like money represents all the economic energy in the civilization, and it kind of equates to all the products, all the services, and all the assets that we have and we're ever going to have. So that's half. The other half of the problems in the civilization are medical and military and political and philosophical and, natural. Mm-hmm. And I think that there are a lot of different solutions to all those problems, and they are all honorable professions, and they all merit a lifetime of consideration for the specialist in all those areas. I think that what I could offer it's constructive is inflation is completely misunderstood. It's a much bigger problem than we understand it to be. We need to introduce engineering and science techniques into economics if we want to further the human condition. Mm-hmm. All government policy is inflationary, and another pernicious myth is inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomena. So, a famous quote by Milton Friedman, I believe, it's like, it's a monetary phenomena. That is, inflation comes from expanding the currency supply. It's a nice phrase, and it's oftentimes quoted by people that are anti-inflation. But again, it just signifies a lack of appreciation of what the issue is. Inflation is, if I had a currency which was completely non-inflationary, if I never printed another dollar, and if I eliminated fractional reserve banking from the face of the earth, we'd still have inflation. And we'd have inflation as long as we have government that is capable of pursuing any kind of policies that are in themselves inflationary, and generally they all are.
So in general, inflationary is the big characteristic of human nature, that governments, collection of groups that have power over others and allocate other people's resources, will try to, intentionally or not, hide the costs of those allocations, like in some tricky ways, whatever the options ever available.
Hiding the cost is like the tertiary thing. Like the primary goal is the government will attempt to do good, right? And
that's the primary problem.
They will attempt to do good, and they will do it. They will do good imperfectly, and they will create oftentimes as much damage, more damage than the good they do. Most government policy will be iatrogenic. It will create more harm than good in the pursuit of it, but it is what it is. The secondary issue is they will unintentionally pay for it by expanding the currency supply without realizing that they're actually paying for it in in a suboptimal fashion. They'll collapse their own currencies while they attempt to do good. The tertiary issue is they will mismeasure how badly they're collapsing the currency. So, for example, if you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and look at the numbers printed by the Fed, they'll say, "Oh, it looks like the dollar has lost 95% of its purchasing power over 100 years." Okay, they sort of fess up that there's a problem, but they make it 95% loss over 100 years. What they don't do is realize it's a 99.7% loss over 80 years. So they will mismeasure just the horrific extent of the monetary policy in pursuit of the foreign policy and the domestic policy, which they overestimate their budget and their means to accomplish their ends, and they underestimate the cost, and they're oblivious to the horrific damage that they do to the civilization, because the mental models that they use that are conventionally taught are wrong, right? The mental model that, like, it's okay, we can print all this money because the velocity of the money is low, right? Because money velocity is a scalar and inflation is a scalar, and we don't see 2% inflation yet, and the money velocity is low, and so it's okay if we print trillions of dollars. Well, the money velocity was immediate, right? The velocity of money through the crypto economy is 10,000 times faster than the velocity of money through the consumer economy, right? It's, I think Nick pointed out when you spoke to him, he said it takes 2 months for a credit card transaction to settle, right? So you want to spend $1 million in the consumer economy, you can move it 6 times a year. You put $1 million into gold will sit in a vault for a decade. Okay, so the velocity of money through gold is 0.1. You put the money in the stock market and you can trade it once a week. The settlement is T plus 2. Maybe you get to 2-to-1 leverage. You might get to a money velocity of 100 a year in the stock market. You put your money into the crypto economy, and these people are settling every 4 hours. And if you're offshore, they're trading with 20x leverage. So if you settle every day and you trade with 20x leverage, you just went to 7,000.
Yeah.
Okay? So the velocity of the money varies. I think the politicians, they don't really understand inflation and they don't understand economics, but you can't blame them, because the economists don't understand economics, because if they did, they would be creating multivariate computer simulations where they actually put in the price of every piece of housing in every city in the world, the full array of foods and the full array of products and the full array of assets. And then on a monthly basis, they would publish all those results. And that's a high bandwidth requirement. And I think that people don't really want to embrace it. And also, there's the most pernicious thing. Like, there's that phrase, you can't tell people what to think, but you can tell them what to think about. The most pernicious thing is I get you to misunderstand the phenomena, so that even when it's happening to you, you don't appreciate that it's a bad thing and you think it's a good thing. So if housing prices are going up 20% year over year, and I say this is great for the American public because most of them are homeowners, then I have misrepresented a phenomena. Inflation is 20%, not 7%. And then I have misrepresented it as being a positive rather than a negative. And people will stare at it, and you could even show them their house on fire and they would perceive it as being great because it's warming them up and they're going to save on their heat costs.
It does seem that the cruder the model, whether it's economics, whether it's psychology, the easier it is to weave whatever the heck narrative you want, and not in a malicious way, but just like it's some kind of like emergent phenomena, this narrative thing that we tell ourselves. So you can tell any kind of story about inflation. Inflation is good, inflation is bad. Like, the cruder the model, the easier it is to tell a narrative about it. And that's what so like, if you take an engineering approach, I feel like it becomes more and more difficult to run away from sort of a true deep understanding of the dynamics of the system.
I mean, honestly, if you went to 100 people on the street and you asked them to define inflation, how many would say it's a vector tracking the change in price of every product, service, asset in the world over time?
No,
Not many.
not
Now,
many.
if you went to them and you said, do you think 2% inflation a year is good or bad? The majority would probably say, well, here it's good.
Yeah.
The majority of economists would say 2% inflation a year is good. And of course, look at the ship next to us. What if I told you that the ship leaked 2%, right, of its volume every something, right? The ship is rotting 2% a year. That means the useful life of the ship is 50 years. Now, ironically, that's true. Like a wooden ship had a 50-year to 100-year life. 100 would be long, 50 years, not unlikely. So when we built ships out of wood, they had a useful life of about 50 years, and then they sunk, they rotted. There's nothing good about it, right? You build a ship out of steel, and it's zero as opposed to 2% degradation. And how much better is 0% versus 2%? Well, 2% means you have a useful life of, it's half-life of 35 years. 2% is a half-life of 35 years. That's basically the half-life of money and gold. If I store your life force in gold, under perfect circumstances, you have a useful life of 35 years. 0% is a useful life of forever. So 0% is immortal. 2% is 35 years average life expectancy. So the idea that you would think the life expectancy of the currency and the civilization should be 35 years instead of forever is kind of a silly notion. But the tragic notion is it was 7 into 70 or 10 years. The money has had a half-life of 10 years, except for the fact that in weak societies in Argentina or the like, the half-life of the money is 3 to 4 years. In Venezuela, 1 year. So the United States dollar and the United States economic system was the most successful economic system in the last 100 years in the world. We won every war. We were the world superpower. Our currency lost 99.7% of its value. And that means, horrifically, every other currency lost everything. Right. In essence, the other ones were 99.9, except for most that were 100% because they all completely failed. And you've got a mainstream economic community, that thinks that inflation is a number and 2% is desirable. It's kind of like, remember George Washington? You know how he died?
No.
Well-meaning physicians bled him to death. Okay. The last thing in the world you would want to do to a sick person is bleed them, right? In the modern world, I think we understand that oxygen is carried by the blood cells, and if there's that phrase, right? A triage phrase. What's the first thing you do in an injury? Stop the bleeding. Single first thing, right? You show up after any action. I look at you, stop the bleeding, because you're going to be dead in a matter of minutes if you bleed out. So it strikes me as being ironic that orthodox conventional wisdom was bleed the patient to death. And this was the most important patient in the country, maybe in the history of the country. And we bled him to death, trying to help him. So when you're actually inflating the money supply at 7%, but you're calling it 2% because you want to help the economy, you're literally bleeding the free market to death. But the sad fact is George Washington went along with it because he thought that they were going to do him good. And the majority of the society, most companies, most conventional thinkers, the working class, they go along with this because they think that someone has their best interest in mind. And the people that are bleeding them to death believe They believe that prescription because their mental models are just so defective, and their understanding of energy and engineering and the economics that are at play is crippled by these mental models.
But that's both the bug and the feature of human civilization, that ideas take hold, they unite us, we believe in them, and we make a lot of cool stuff happen by, as an average sort of, just the fact of the matter, a lot of people believe the same thing. They get together and they get some shit done because they believe that thing. And then some ideas can be really bad and really destructive, but on average, the ideas seem to be progressing in the direction of good.